A séance was held at a quiet old mansion. The medium collapsed, but the voice didn't stop. A phonograph began to speak, even though no one had touched it. It said Sherlock Holmes's name, and it spoke in the voice of a man who was supposed to be dead. Now Holmes must find the truth, before the past takes over his mind. Welcome to the Detective Files, where logic meets mystery, and no case stays closed for long. It was a cold October morning in 1893. Fog covered the streets outside. Sherlock Holmes and I were sitting in our flat at 221B Baker Street when a young man arrived looking worried. "My name is Edmund Caro," he said. "I'm a solicitor for the Dartmoor Spiritual Society." "Mr. Holmes, we need your help." Holmes leaned forward. "Go on." Caro looked nervous. "Every autumn, the society holds a séance at Halberd Hall, an old estate near Dartmoor. But this year, something strange happened." "What sort of strange?" Holmes asked. Caro took a breath. "During the séance, the medium, Miss Evangeline Locke, passed out." Everyone was shocked. "But then, a voice kept speaking." "A voice?" I asked. "Yes," Caro said. "It came from an old phonograph, but no one had touched it. It wasn't even wound up. Still, it spoke." Quote. Holmes stayed quiet. Caro looked more uneasy now. "The voice said something else too, Mr. Holmes." "It said your name." Holmes raised his eyebrows. "What exactly did it say?" he asked. Caro's voice dropped. "Tell Holmes his master returns. The reckoning begins." Holmes stood and walked to the window. The fog outside looked even heavier. "Now I have no master," he said calmly. Then he turned to me. "Watson, pack your coat. We're going to Dartmoor." We left the next morning by train. As we traveled west, the land grew darker and lonelier. Fog rolled over the fields like waves. The air felt heavy, as if something unseen was watching. By late afternoon, we arrived at Halberd Hall. The house was huge and old, its walls covered in ivy. A single gas lamp flickered near the door. No servants greeted us. Only Caro, who looked even more worried than before. "She's awake now," he said, meaning the medium. "But she hasn't spoken a word since it happened. It's like something took her voice." Holmes nodded slowly. "Take us inside." The front hall was cold and quiet. The walls smelled of damp wood, old smoke, and something bitter. Caro stopped us near the staircase. "Before I show you the ballroom, someone left this for you." He handed Holmes a small black pouch. Inside was a white porcelain mask. It looked like a face of someone sleeping, but the lips were slightly open. Holmes stared at it for a long moment. Then he said, "Interesting." The next morning, Halberd Hall felt even colder. Caro led us down a long hallway. It was quiet. Too quiet. No footsteps above us, no sound of life in the house. We stopped at a large painting. It showed an old man with a scar on his face and a sword in his hand. "Colonel Thaddeus Halberd," Caro said. "This ballroom used to be a dueling room. He fought many men here." Holmes gave the painting a long look, then said softly, "Now it's used to speak to the dead." Strange how things change. Caro opened two heavy wooden doors. We stepped into the ballroom. It was big and cold, with long red curtains hanging by the windows. In the center of the room, 12 chairs were set in a circle. A young woman sat in one of them, perfectly still. She wore a light-colored dress and looked like a statue. Pale skin, wide eyes, no movement. "Miss Evangeline Locke," Caro said. "She hasn't spoken since that night." Holmes asked. "No, not a word." Holmes slowly walked around the room. In the center of the circle, I saw 4 strange things. A copper bowl filled with ashes. 3 small wax figures, melted and twisted. A cracked mirror. And an old phonograph, black with soot. Holmes knelt next to the phonograph. "This is the machine that made the voice." "Yes," Caro said, "but it had no cylinder inside. It just started playing by itself." Holmes touched the machine gently. "Watson, smell that." I leaned in. "It smells like something sour and sweet at the same time." "Ether," Holmes said. "It's used in medicine." But here, it was used for something else. He stood up and looked at Miss Locke. "May I speak to her?" he asked. Caro nodded. Holmes knelt in front of her and spoke gently. "Miss Locke, I am Sherlock Holmes. I believe someone used you. You're not crazy, you're trying to protect yourself. A single tear ran down her cheek. Holmes took the white mask from his coat and held it up. Do you know this? She didn't speak, but slowly she raised her hand and pointed, not at the mask, at the phonograph. Holmes stood up straight. She remembers something, he said. The ether wasn't used to see ghosts. It was used to control her mind. Caro looked shocked. Control her? Yes. This wasn't about spirits. Someone planned this. That night we stayed in a small bedroom above the ballroom. Holmes didn't eat. He sat by the fire, quiet, thinking. After a long time he spoke. Watson. The voice they heard in that room. The one that spoke my name. He looked at the fire, his face still. It sounded like Moriarty. I felt a chill go down my spine. But Moriarty is dead, I said. You saw him fall at the Reichenbach Falls. Holmes nodded. I know. That's what makes this so troubling. We woke early the next morning. Rain tapped gently on the windows. Outside the fog still covered everything. The moor looked like it had disappeared. Holmes was already dressed. He stood by the window, with his hands behind his back, thinking deeply. There's something hiding in this place, Watson, he said quietly, and I mean to find it. After a quick breakfast, we returned to the ballroom. This time, someone else was already there. He was a short man, with curly grey hair, and big round glasses. He held a small hammer and a brush in his hands. This is Mr. Giles Weatherby, said Caro. He's an acoustics expert. He came to study how sound travels in this room. Holmes nodded politely. Have you discovered anything interesting, Mr. Weatherby? The man looked up and gave a nervous smile. Yes. That wall over there. He pointed to the far side of the ballroom. It sounds hollow. There's something behind it. Holmes walked over and tapped on the wall. I followed. The sound was different. It echoed slightly. Feel this, Holmes said. I touched the wall. It was cold. Much colder than the rest of the room. There's a hidden space here, Holmes said. Maybe a passage. Weatherby began gently chipping away at the plaster. After a few minutes, part of the wall broke open. Behind it was a narrow, dark passage. Holmes lit a lantern. Stay close, Watson. We stepped inside. The passage was tight, just wide enough for one man. The air was thick with dust. It smelled like old smoke and something chemical. Ether again, Holmes said. Someone used this space recently. We moved slowly through the dark tunnel. After about 20 steps, Holmes stopped. Look, on the ground was a small metal box. Holmes picked it up and opened it. Inside was a wax cylinder, the kind used in phonographs. It seems we've found the missing voice, Holmes said. He handed it to me carefully. There's more, he added. See that pipe above us? I looked up. A narrow metal pipe ran along the top of the passage. This connects to the ballroom, Holmes said. Someone could have used it to send sound into the room, to make it seem like a ghost was speaking. A trick, I said. A clever one, Holmes replied. But now we know. The séance was staged. We returned to the ballroom and showed the wax cylinder to Caro. His face went pale, so it wasn't real. No, Holmes said, but someone wanted it to feel real. And they knew the right details. Enough to scare Miss Locke and the guests. Caro looked at Miss Locke, who still sat quietly by the window. Then who did it? He asked. Holmes looked at the phonograph again, his eyes sharp. That, Mr. Caro, is our next question. Later that afternoon, Holmes and I sat in the study of Halbert Hall. The rain still fell outside, soft and steady. The walls creaked every now and then, like the house was breathing. Holmes had placed the wax cylinder from the hidden tunnel on a cloth. He stared at it for a long time. There's something strange about this, he said. I looked closer. It just looks like any other cylinder. Holmes shook his head. No. This one has tiny scratches along the edges. Marks that don't belong, as if someone tried to copy another voice onto it. Just then, Giles Weatherby entered with a small machine. It was an old phonograph, similar to the one in the ballroom. I brought a working model, he said. You wanted to play the cylinder? Holmes nodded. Yes, but just once. And at a low volume, Weatherby set the machine on the table. Holmes carefully inserted the cylinder. We all leaned in. The voice that came out was rough and full of static, but I recognized something at once. The tone, the cold way it spoke. It said, "Sherlock Holmes, your time ends where mine began. The blood you spilled is not forgotten." Then silence. Weatherby looked confused. Caro looked afraid. But Holmes sat perfectly still. "That voice," I said. "It's his." Holmes nodded once. "Yes, it's made to sound like Moriarty. But he's dead." Holmes didn't answer right away. He stared at the phonograph, deep in thought. "Someone recorded this on purpose," he said. "Not just to frighten, but to pull me in. This wasn't meant for Miss Locke. It was meant for me." Later that night, Holmes paced our bedroom floor. I watched from the chair by the fire. "You believe someone is pretending to be Moriarty?" "Yes," he said. "But not just anyone. Someone with knowledge of his voice, his way of speaking. Even his past with me." "Could it be one of his old followers?" I asked. Holmes stopped walking. "Possibly. But this is more than revenge. It's testing me. As if I'm being watched." A knock at the door broke the silence. It was Caro. "There's someone here to see you," he said. "She just arrived. Said you'd want to speak with her." "Who?" Holmes asked. "An actress," Caro said. "Her name is Vivienne." Lark. Holmes blinked once. "Vivienne. You know her?" I asked. Holmes took a deep breath. "Years ago. She was once Moriarty's voice on stage. During one of his hidden experiments." I looked at Holmes in shock. "Are you saying she helped him fake his voice?" Quote. Holmes didn't answer. He simply walked to the door. "Let's speak with Miss Lark." Vivienne Lark stood in the hallway, dressed in black with a small green feather on her hat. She was older now, perhaps in her 40s. But there was something sharp in her eyes. She looked directly at Holmes and smiled softly. "It's been a long time," she said. Holmes gave a small nod. "Miss Lark, I never expected to see you again." She stepped inside, glancing at me politely, then back to Holmes. "When I heard about the séance and the strange voice, I knew you'd come." "Did you know the voice was meant to sound like Moriarty?" Holmes asked. Vivienne's expression didn't change. "Of course I did. I trained to copy his voice, remember? For his experiments. His games." Holmes's voice became firm. "But he's gone. So who's trying to bring him back?" Vivienne sighed. "That's why I'm here. I think someone is using what he taught to scare people. Maybe worse." She opened her small handbag and pulled out a folded paper. It was a page of sheet music, but instead of notes, it had odd marks and symbols. "What's this?" I asked. "A sound map," Vivienne said. "It's part of a system Moriarty created to change how the brain hears things. It could make people think they were hearing voices from the dead." Quote. Holmes studied the page closely. "Psychological tricks, acoustics, ether to dull the mind, sound maps to guide the voice." Vivienne nodded. "Someone is trying to finish what Moriarty started." We returned to the ballroom that evening. Holmes asked everyone to leave the room, except Vivienne, me, and himself. He placed the wax cylinder on the phonograph again. "Vivienne," he said, "I want you to tell me if this voice was changed." She listened closely. Then she said, "Yes, it's my voice, but it's been stretched, slowed in parts, and layered with echo. Someone used recordings of me from years ago and altered them." "Why would they use your voice?" I asked. She looked at me sadly. "Because I was the voice of Moriarty in his final project. I was the mask behind the curtain." Holmes looked at both of us. "This isn't about ghosts," he said. "It's about control, mind control." That night, Holmes stood by the fireplace in our room, holding the sound map. Moriarty believed that with the right sound, the right voice, you could push someone into madness or obedience. "Do you think he was right?" I asked. Holmes didn't answer. Instead, he looked up and said, "Someone is trying to bring Moriarty's methods back to life, and I fear Miss Locke was only the first test." The next morning we found something strange. The porcelain mask, the one Holmes had been keeping wrapped in a cloth, was no longer on the table. It had moved. Not far, just a few feet. But no one had entered the room. The door had stayed locked. Holmes stared at the spot where the mask now lay, near the edge of the hearth. Watson, he said quietly. Did you touch this? No, I replied. I haven't been in the room since last night. Holmes knelt down and studied the floor. No footprints. But this mark here, he pointed to a faint scratch on the wooden floor, shows the mask was dragged. By what? I asked. There's no string, no wire. Holmes didn't answer. Instead, he reached out and touched the mask. It was warm. I think it reacted to heat, he said. It may contain something. A chemical that expands or moves when warmed. He turned the mask over. Inside, hidden behind the cheek, was a small silver disc. A voice disc, he said. Another sound device, like a mini cylinder. He held it up. This was inside the mask. Someone wanted it to speak when warmed, maybe by body heat. Vivienne entered the room just then. Did it play anything? She asked. No, Holmes replied, but it was meant to. Maybe it failed, or maybe the message has already been played. Vivienne looked uneasy. You think the mask was meant to be worn? She asked. Yes, Holmes said, like an ether mask. To make the wearer calm and vulnerable, to sound like Miss Locke. I asked exactly. Holmes said she may have worn this, unknowingly, and the voice whispered to her while she was drugged. That evening, we asked Miss Locke's maid if she had seen the mask before. The maid, a shy young woman named Clara, nodded yes. The night of the séance, I saw Miss Locke holding it. She said it was a gift. From whom? Holmes asked. I don't know, Clara said. It was left outside her door. In the black pouch. Holmes grew still. Watson, he said. This wasn't just a séance. It was a setup. Someone used every tool they had. The ether, the sound map, the phonograph, even the mask, to create a false spirit and use Miss Locke as the puppet. Why? I asked. Holmes looked down at the mask to send a message, he said to me. The next morning, Holmes and I sat down with Vivienne Lark again. He had the sound map spread out on the table, next to the mask and the silver disc. We need to know who else had access to these tools, Holmes said. Vivienne nodded. There was one man. He worked with Moriarty in secret. A technician. He built sound machines and modified phonographs. His name was Felix Corwin. Where is he now? I asked. Vivienne gave a strange smile. That's the thing. Felix died 5 years ago. Or at least, that's what we were told. Holmes tapped the sound map with his finger. This design is too perfect. Too advanced. It has to be his work. We went through the society's guest list from the night of the séance. Most names meant nothing. Local members, minor scholars, and believers. But then Holmes stopped at one name. Frederick Carr. He read aloud, a sound engineer from London. Could that be him? I asked. Holmes nodded slowly. An alias. A fake name. It could be Felix Corwin using a new identity. We called for Caro. Do you have a photo of Mr. Carr? Holmes asked him. Caro went to fetch the visitor records. He returned with a thin booklet. Inside was a sketch of a bearded man with a long face and deep eyes. Holmes stared at it. That's him, Vivienne said quietly. He's aged, but I'd know those eyes anywhere. That evening, Holmes spoke to the local constable and asked for a quiet search of the nearby towns. Felix, or Frederick Carr, had stayed at a small inn 2 miles from Halbert Hall. But when we arrived there, he was gone. Left this morning, the innkeeper said. Didn't say where he was going. We checked his room. It was clean. Too clean. No clothes, no papers, no tools, nothing left behind. Except one thing. On the small writing desk, someone had carved a single word into the wood. Resonance. Holmes stared at it. He's playing a larger game, he said. He's not just faking ghosts. He's trying to see what the mind can be made to believe. That night, Holmes looked troubled. He's using Moriarty's tricks and pushing them further, he said. He's not trying to fool everyone. Just the right person. Who? I asked. Holmes didn't speak for a moment. Then he said, Me. The next morning, Holmes asked Miss Locke to meet us in the study. She looked tired but more alert than before. Her voice was still gone, but her eyes seemed stronger. Holmes placed the porcelain mask and silver disc on the table between them. I believe someone used this mask to control your mind, he told her gently. They made you breathe in ether, then played a voice through the disc while you were weak. Miss Locke stared at the mask, then slowly nodded. A tear slid down her cheek. Vivienne sat beside her and took her hand. You were never mad, Vivienne said softly. You were used. Holmes stood and began pacing. This entire séance was built to test what one person's mind could take. If they could believe the dead were speaking, if they could be made to fear or obey. Why her, I asked. Because she's trusted by the society. Holmes said she's calm. Sensitive. The perfect subject for a controlled test. He turned to Caro, who invited Frederick Carr to the séance. Caro looked guilty. I did. He contacted us months ago. Said he had new sound technology to enhance our spiritual events. I believed him. Holmes gave a small nod. So he planned this for months. Quote. That night, Holmes worked alone in the ballroom for hours. I watched from the doorway, as he placed the mask, the phonograph, and even mirrors around the room, recreating the séance setup. Finally, he called us in. I'm going to play the message again, he said, but this time, in full, with the room exactly how it was that night. He turned on the phonograph. The cylinder began to spin. The voice came, dark, slow, and full of echoes. I was never truly gone, Sherlock Holmes. Your mind is where I now live. You are my final experiment. Then silence. I looked at Holmes. He didn't move. Then he whispered, He's not testing Miss Locke anymore. He's testing me. That night, Holmes didn't sleep. He sat by the fire, reading over the sound map again and again. Every now and then, he would hum quietly, as if testing something. I sat nearby Holmes. You need rest. I'm close, Watson, he said. Close to understanding what Corwin is really after he picked up the silver disc and held it to the light. This isn't just a recording. It's designed to influence the brain. Certain sounds, certain patterns, they create a kind of mental loop. You start hearing things that aren't there. He looked at me with tired eyes. It's not a voice from the dead. It's a trap for the mind. The next morning, Holmes asked Weatherby to bring a second phonograph. I want to test something, he said. We'll play the message backwards. We gathered in the ballroom. Holmes placed both phonographs side by side. On one the message played normally, on the other it played in reverse. At first it was just noise, but then something clear came through the reversed version ether mirror mask. It was a list of tools. Holmes's eyes lit up. He's leaving clues inside the sound. Why, I asked. Because he wants me to follow them, Holmes said. He's daring me to understand. Quote. That evening, a package arrived at the hall. No name, no address. Inside was a small box. Holmes opened it carefully. Inside was a second mask, almost the same as the first, but this one was cracked. On the inside, written in tiny letters, were 3 words. You wore it once, Holmes froze. He stepped back, staring at the cracked mask like it had spoken. Holmes, I asked. He didn't answer. Instead, he whispered, He's not just copying Moriarty's voice. He's copying my past. Holmes held the cracked mask in his hands for a long time. Then he spoke. I don't remember ever wearing this. But something about it feels familiar. He placed it gently on the table. If what Corwin wrote is true, then this goes deeper than we thought. You believe he did something to you in the past, I asked. Holmes nodded slowly. It's possible. During those missing months after Reichenbach, when the world thought I was dead, I remembered that time. Holmes had vanished for nearly 3 years before suddenly returning. He never spoke much about what happened during that time. You think Corwin got to you then, I asked. I think I was tested, without knowing it, Holmes said. And now he's trying to awaken those memories. Like calling out to a sleeping part of my mind. Vivienne joined us in the study. Holmes handed her the cracked mask. Have you seen this one before? She looked at it closely. Then her face changed. Yes. This was part of Moriarty's last project, the Echo Room. It was meant to test how sound affects memory. I was told it was destroyed. But it wasn't, Holmes said. Corwin kept it. And now he wants me to remember what happened in that room. He stood suddenly. Watson, we need to go back to that tunnel. There's more to find. We returned to the narrow passage behind the ballroom wall. Holmes carried the lantern. I followed closely. We reached the spot where we had found the first wax cylinder. Holmes began tapping along the walls. Then he stopped. Here. He pressed on a small wooden panel. It opened with a soft click. Inside was a hidden compartment. There, wrapped in cloth, was another wax cylinder. But this one was labeled. It said, Holmes, Session 3. I looked at Holmes. What does that mean? He didn't speak. He looked pale. Very slowly he said, That means I was the test subject. We returned to the study. Holmes sat down in silence, holding the new wax cylinder marked Holmes. Session 3. Weatherby set up the phonograph again. The room was quiet. No one moved. Holmes nodded. Play it. The machine clicked. The cylinder began to turn. At first we heard nothing but soft breathing. Then a voice spoke. Not Moriarty's voice. Holmes's Session 3, time uncertain, subject appears calm. We all froze. It was Holmes. Younger, confused, tired. I don't remember entering the room, but there's light and sound. It feels like I'm dreaming. Then, silence again. Then, another voice. Not one we knew. Calm, cold, almost kind. Good, Mr. Holmes. Just breathe. The mask helps you remember. Holmes stood suddenly and turned off the machine. That's enough. The room was heavy with silence. You were a subject, I said in one of Moriarty's sound experiments. Holmes nodded, and Corwin recorded it. Kept it hidden all these years. Why send it now? Vivienne asked. Because he wants me to remember, Holmes said, and break. Later that night, Holmes sat alone with the mask and the 2 cylinders. When I entered the room he looked up. I always trusted logic, Watson, he said quietly. But now I question my own mind. You're still yourself, I said. Am I? He asked. What if some part of me was shaped by him? I put a hand on his shoulder. You are Sherlock Holmes. And whoever did this made a mistake. Holmes looked at me. For once, his eyes showed something rare. Doubt. The next morning Holmes gave clear instructions. Tell the constable to watch all train stations leaving Dartmoor, he said. Felix Corwin won't run far. Not now, Vivienne stepped forward. What will you do? I will set a trap, Holmes said. He can't resist. That night, we returned to the ballroom one last time. Holmes placed both masks, the new one and the cracked one, in the center of the circle. He arranged the phonograph beside them and left the cylinder labeled Session 3 on the table nearby. Then he turned down the gas lights and stepped back into the shadows. We waited. The room was silent for a long time. Then, a sound, a soft click. A shadow slipped into the room. A man, tall, with a grey coat and thin hands, moved toward the masks. His face was older, sharp and calm. He picked up the cracked mask and smiled. That's when Holmes stepped forward. Good evening, Mr. Corwin. Felix froze. He turned slowly. I was wondering when you'd remember me. Holmes's voice was steady. You took part of my past. But you don't control my future, Corwin chuckled. Oh, Sherlock, I never wanted control. Just proof of what? That you were changed. That Moriarty reached into your mind and left something behind. Holmes took a step closer. You were wrong, he said. Corwin raised his hands. Then let the world hear the recording. Let them judge if you're still pure reason or part echo. Holmes didn't move. There's no need. The truth is simple. I'm not the same man I was before Reichenbach, but I chose who I became after. The constable stepped in then. Corwin didn't fight. He smiled as they took him away. Later, as we sat in the quiet ballroom, Holmes looked at the phonograph one last time. I could destroy it, he said. But you won't, I replied. He nodded because even the darkest memories have value, if they remind us of what we overcame. He picked up the cracked mask and placed it back in its pouch. This case wasn't about spirits, Watson. It was about belief. And fear, I added. Holmes looked at me. Yes. And how easily both can be shaped. With a whisper. We left Halbert Hall the next day. The fog was still thick, but the air somehow felt lighter. The society would move out, Caro told us. The séances would end. As our train pulled away from the moor, Holmes sat with his eyes closed. Not asleep. Just still. I watched him for a long time. Sometimes, even a mind as sharp as Holmes's isn't just made of reason. Sometimes, it carries scars we cannot see. And yet, he remains not just the world's greatest detective, but the man who chose truth over fear. If you enjoyed this mystery, don't forget to subscribe. More chilling cases, more brilliant deductions. Only on the Detective Files.